November 2012, a small recording studio in Manhattan. Sound engineer Marcus Webb was digitizing old master tapes from the early 1990s when he discovered something that would shake the music world to its core. Buried between commercial recordings and forgotten demos was a tape labeled simply W+M, Private November 1991. When Marcus pressed play, what emerged from the studio monitors made him stop breathing. Two of the most powerful voices in music history, voices that the world had never heard together, were blending in perfect harmony on a song that had never been released, never been mentioned, and according to every music historian, should not exist. Whitney Houston and Madonna, two artists the media had spent a decade portraying as rivals, had secretly recorded a duet 21 years earlier. But this wasn't just any recording. As Marcus listened to the raw emotion in their voices, the intimacy of their performance, and the handwritten note attached to the tape that read, "For us only, never to be released," he realized he had stumbled onto something far more profound than a lost recording. He had found evidence of a friendship that both women had protected fiercely from a world that preferred to see them as enemies. The question that would haunt everyone who eventually heard this tape was simple but devastating. If these two legends had shared this kind of bond, what else had the world gotten wrong about them? The idea for the charity recording session came from an unexpected source. Quincy Jones, the legendary producer who had worked with both artists, had organized a benefit concert for the newly established Power of Music Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing music education in underserved communities. Both Whitney and Madonna had agreed to perform, but Quincy had a bigger vision. He wanted them to record something together, something that would symbolize the unity that music could create. The music industry in 1990, one was obsessed with creating rivalries, especially between successful women. Whitney Houston, with her powerhouse vocals and traditional elegance, was constantly positioned against Madonna, with her provocative style and pop innovation. Magazines ran comparison articles with headlines like, "Who Rules Music?" and award shows fueled the narrative by pitting them against each other in the same categories. But what the public didn't know was that Whitney and Madonna had crossed paths dozens of times over the years, and each encounter had revealed a mutual respect that neither woman publicly acknowledged, not because they wanted to hide it, but because they knew the media would twist it into something it wasn't. When Quincy approached Whitney about the duet concept, her first reaction was cautious. She had spent years carefully managing her public image, and the idea of doing something that could be misinterpreted made her nervous. But Quincy knew exactly what to say. "Whitney, this isn't about the public or the press. This is about two artists making music because it matters, not because someone is watching." That night, Whitney called her mother, Cissy Houston, to discuss the opportunity. Cissy had been in the music industry long enough to understand both the potential and the risk. "Baby, you've spent your whole career singing for other people. Maybe it's time to sing for yourself." Those words settled something in Whitney's heart. This wouldn't be a performance. It would be an expression of something real. Madonna's response to Quincy's proposal was characteristically direct. "If we're going to do this, it has to be honest. No publicity, no cameras, no manufactured moment for the media to dissect. Just two women making music." Quincy agreed immediately. He understood that for this collaboration to have genuine meaning, it had to exist outside the machinery of the music industry. He booked a small, private studio in Manhattan for November 15, 1991, and made a promise to both artists. "What happens in that studio stays between us. This is your moment, not the world's." When Whitney arrived at the studio that Friday evening, she was surprised by how nervous she felt. She had performed for presidents, recorded with the greatest producers in the world, and commanded audiences of hundreds of thousands. But the idea of being alone in a room with Madonna, without the buffer of public performance or industry obligations, felt strangely intimate and vulnerable. Madonna arrived 30 minutes later, carrying a guitar case and a notebook filled with handwritten lyrics. She had been working on material for what would eventually become her erotica album, but tonight she had something different in mind. "I've been thinking about what we should sing," she said as she set down her guitar. "Every duet people expect from us would be about competition or comparison. I don't want that. I want something that's about the parts of ourselves we don't usually show." Two women sat across from each other in the small studio control room, and for the first time in their careers, they had an honest conversation about what it felt like to be them. Whitney spoke about the pressure of perfection, how every note she sang was scrutinized for technical flawness, how she sometimes felt like a beautiful voice without permission to be a complete human being. Madonna talked about being dismissed as a provocateur, how her artistic choices were constantly reduced to publicity stunts, how exhausting it was to always be the one pushing boundaries, while others got credit for being real artists. "We're both prisoners of what people expect us to be," Madonna said quietly. "You're the angel who can't be flawed, and I'm the rebel who can't be vulnerable. Neither of us gets to be whole." That realization became the foundation for what they decided to record. Instead of choosing a hit song or writing something commercial, they decided to interpret a classic that carried profound meaning for both of them. The song they chose was Bridge Over Troubled Water, the Simon and Garfunkel masterpiece about friendship, support, and being there for someone when they need you most. "This song is about what we could be for each other," Whitney said as they began arranging their version. "What we already are for each other, even if nobody knows it." The recording session lasted 4 hours, but it felt like no time at all. With only Quincy at the controls and a small group of trusted session musicians, Whitney and Madonna created something that transcended their individual artistry. Whitney's voice provided the power and emotional depth, soaring through the verses with the kind of vulnerability she rarely showed in her commercial work. Madonna's voice, often underestimated for its emotional range, carried the harmonies with a tenderness that revealed the artist behind the icon. What made the recording extraordinary wasn't just the technical excellence, though both women performed flawlessly. It was the palpable sense of connection between them. When they sang the lines about being a bridge over troubled water, laying themselves down to help a friend, every word carried the weight of genuine commitment. This wasn't performance. It was promise. Between takes, something even more remarkable happened. The two women, who had spent years maintaining professional distance in public, began sharing the stories behind their carefully constructed public images. Whitney talked about the pressure from her family to maintain a certain image, about the constant judgment of her choices, about how lonely it felt to be seen as perfect when she knew she was beautifully, messily human. Madonna spoke about the criticism she faced for every artistic choice, about being called calculated when she was actually being completely authentic, about the exhaustion of having to be shocking when she just wanted to be respected. "You know what I realized?" Madonna said during a break. "The world needs us to be different so they can choose sides. But we're not that different. We're both just trying to make music that matters while dealing with the impossible expectations of being women in this industry." Whitney nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I've never said this to anyone, but sometimes I wish I could be more like you. I wish I had your courage to not care what people think." Madonna smiled sadly. "And I wish I had your gift for making people feel loved by your music. We each have what the other wishes for. Maybe that's why we're supposed to be here together tonight." When they finished the final take of their duet, both women knew immediately that they had created something special. Quincy played it back through the studio monitors, and the three of them sat in silence as their voices filled the room. The arrangement was simple, acoustic guitar, piano, soft strings, allowing the raw emotion of their vocals to be the centerpiece. Whitney's powerful lead balanced perfectly with Madonna's harmonic support, and there were moments where their voices intertwined so completely that it was impossible to distinguish where one ended and the other began. "This is the most honest thing I've ever recorded," Whitney said when the playback ended. "It feels like we gave each other permission to be vulnerable." Madonna agreed. "This is just for us, right? This is the version of ourselves that we don't have to explain or defend." That's when they made the decision that would keep this recording hidden for 2 decades. They asked Quincy to make only 3 copies of the master tape. One for Whitney, one for Madonna, and one for Quincy himself. They signed an agreement, handwritten on studio letterhead, that this recording would never be released commercially, never be used for promotion, and never be shared with anyone outside their circle of trust. "This is our truth," Whitney wrote on the tape label. "For us only." But they added one more element that would later prove to be heartbreakingly significant. They each wrote a note to the other, sealed it in an envelope, and attached it to their respective copies of the tape. The notes were to be read only when you need to remember who you really are. Whitney's note to Madonna was simple but powerful. "You are not the controversy. You are the courage. Don't let them make you forget that you're an artist first and a provocateur only when you choose to be. Your authenticity is your greatest gift." Madonna's note to Whitney was equally profound. "You are not the perfection. You are the humanity. Don't let them make you forget that your voice is powerful because it comes from a woman who feels everything deeply, not because it hits every note perfectly. Your vulnerability is your greatest strength. Over the following years, Whitney and Madonna maintained their public distance while privately supporting each other through some of their most challenging moments. When Whitney married Bobby Brown in 1992, Madonna was one of the few people in the industry who didn't judge her choice. She sent a private note that said, "Love who you love. Ignore everyone else." When Madonna faced intense backlash for her sex book and erotica album, Whitney called her from a pay phone during a tour stop to tell her, "Don't apologize for being yourself. The world will catch up eventually." These small acts of private solidarity meant everything to both women, but they kept them carefully hidden from a media that would have sensationalized their friendship. In 1996, when Whitney starred in The Preacher's Wife and faced criticism for playing it safe with her film choices, Madonna sent her a copy of their duet with a note. "Remember what we promised each other. You don't owe anyone your truth except yourself." The tape became a touchstone for both women, something they would listen to during their lowest moments to remember who they had been before the world's expectations had become so heavy. For Whitney especially, as her marriage became increasingly troubled and rumors about her personal struggles began circulating in the late 1990s, the recording was a reminder of her strength. She told her close friend and assistant, Mary Jones, about the tape in 2002. "There's this recording that nobody knows about. It's me and Madonna, and when I listen to it, I remember that I used to be brave. I'm trying to find my way back to that person." But Whitney never shared the recording publicly, honoring the pact she and Madonna had made. Even during her most difficult years, when positive press might have helped rehabilitate her public image, she kept the duet private. This wasn't about public relations. This was about preserving something sacred. In 2009, Whitney was in the middle of her comeback attempt. Her 2002 interview with Diane Sawyer had been brutally difficult, and her attempted comeback album in 2009 received mixed reviews. The public narrative around Whitney had shifted from greatest voice of her generation to tragic figure struggling with addiction. She was trying desperately to rebuild her career and her life, but the weight of public judgment was crushing. That's when Madonna made a decision that would prove to be one of the most meaningful gestures of their friendship. She sent Whitney a package containing the original master tape of their 1991 duet, along with Madonna's handwritten note from that night and a new letter. The new letter said, "You've been carrying the world's expectations alone for too long. Listen to this and remember when we were just two women making music because it mattered. You are still that woman. You were always enough, Whitney. You've always been enough." Whitney received the package while staying at a friend's home in New Jersey, trying to maintain sobriety and figure out her next steps. When she played the tape and heard her own voice, strong and confident and vulnerable in all the right ways, she broke down completely. "I had forgotten what I sounded like when I wasn't trying to be perfect," she later told Mary Jones. "I had forgotten that my voice was powerful because it was mine, not because it met someone else's standard." The tape became part of Whitney's daily routine during her recovery process. She would listen to it every morning, letting it remind her of the woman she had been and could be again. Friends who visited during this time reported that Whitney seemed more at peace with herself than she had been in years. "She stopped apologizing for being human," one friend recalled. "She started talking about her voice as a gift she was stewarding rather than a burden she was carrying." Whitney called Madonna to thank her for the gift, and they had a conversation that lasted 3 hours. They talked about everything they had been through since that night in 1991, about the price of fame, about the way women in the industry were pitted against each other, about forgiveness and redemption, and the possibility of second acts. "I want people to hear this someday," Whitney told Madonna. "Not now, but someday. I want them to know that we were friends, that we supported each other, that women don't have to be enemies just because the world wants us to be." Madonna agreed. "When the time is right, when we're both ready, we'll share it, but only when it can be received the way we intended it, as proof that connection is more powerful than competition." On February 11th, 2012, Whitney Houston was found dead in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. The music world was devastated, but no one more so than Madonna, who had lost not just a colleague but a true friend. At Whitney's funeral, Madonna sat in the back, grieving privately while the world focused on the public tributes. She had wanted to speak, to tell everyone about the real Whitney she had known, but she knew that her presence would become the story rather than Whitney's legacy. Instead, she wrote a tribute that was read by a mutual friend. Whitney taught me that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. She was the bravest person I ever knew, not because she was perfect, but because she kept showing up even when the world made it almost impossible to do so. 8 months after Whitney's death, sound engineer Marcus Webb made his discovery. The master tape that Quincy Jones had kept in storage had been transferred to the studio where Marcus worked, part of a larger project to preserve historic recordings. When Marcus heard the duet, he immediately understood its significance, but he also understood that releasing it required careful consideration. He contacted Quincy Jones, who contacted Madonna. The three of them, along with representatives from Whitney's estate, had to make a difficult decision. This recording had been intended as private, a sacred space between two friends. But now that Whitney was gone, did the same rules apply? Could this recording actually honor her memory by showing the world a side of her they had never seen? Madonna spent weeks agonizing over the decision. On one hand, she wanted to honor the pact she and Whitney had made. On the other hand, she knew that this recording could reshape how people understood both of them. Whitney wanted people to hear this eventually, Madonna told the estate representatives. She wanted people to know that we were friends, that women could support each other. Maybe now, when we're finally having conversations about how the media treats women, maybe now is when people are ready to understand what this recording really means. The decision was made to release the duet, but with strict parameters. It would not be sold commercially. It would be released as a free download with all proceeds from any associated merchandise going to music education charities. And most importantly, it would be released with the full context of the story behind it, including the letters the two women had written to each other. When the recording was released on November 15, 2013, exactly 22 years after it was made, the response was overwhelming. The duet went viral immediately, not because it was scandalous or shocking, but because it was deeply, profoundly moving. Millions of people heard Whitney's voice at its most powerful and Madonna's voice at its most tender, and they heard two women who had been turned into symbols of rivalry revealing themselves as allies. The letters were published alongside the recording, and their words about supporting each other, about resisting the pressure to be perfect or provocative, about choosing authenticity over expectation, resonated with people around the world. Social media exploded with reactions. Women shared stories of their own friendships, of times they had been pitted against other women, of the relief of finding someone who understood their struggles. The hashtag, #BridgeOverTroubledWater, trended worldwide, and the conversation shifted from celebrity gossip to meaningful discussion about how women are portrayed in media. Music critics who had spent decades analyzing both artists' careers had to reconsider their narratives. The recording proved that the rivalry they had written about for years had been largely manufactured, and that the two women they had portrayed as opposites were actually kindred spirits. Rolling Stone published a major feature titled "The Duet That Rewrites Music History," examining how media narratives about female artists had obscured the real relationships and collaborations between them. But the most powerful responses came from ordinary listeners who heard something in that recording that spoke to their own experiences. A woman named Sarah posted on social media, "I've spent my whole career being told I'm too emotional to be taken seriously. Hearing Whitney embrace her vulnerability gives me permission to be human." Another listener, James, wrote, "My sister and her best friend had a falling out because of rumors and gossip. They sent each other this song and reconciled after 5 years. Whitney and Madonna showed them that friendship is worth fighting for." At the 2014 Grammy Awards, Madonna performed "Bridge Over Troubled Water" as a tribute to Whitney. It was a stunning, stripped-down performance, just Madonna and a piano, letting the emotion of the song and the memory of her friend carry the moment. When she reached the chorus, projected images of Whitney appeared behind her, and Madonna's voice was joined by Whitney's recorded vocals from their original duet. The standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. After her performance, Madonna spoke directly to the audience and to the millions watching at home. "Whitney and I recorded this song together 23 years ago. We never released it because it was too precious, too personal. It was proof that even when the world tries to turn us into enemies, friendship is possible. Whitney taught me that vulnerability is strength, that perfection is not the goal, and that the best thing we can do with our voices is use them to lift each other up. I miss my friend every day, but I hear her in this song, and I remember everything she taught me. The recording of their duet has since been used in countless contexts. Documentaries about female friendship, music education programs about the power of collaboration, therapy sessions exploring authenticity and self-acceptance. Every year on November 15th, the anniversary of the original recording session, fans around the world share the song and reflect on its message. The song has been covered by dozens of artists, each bringing their own interpretation, but always maintaining the spirit of solidarity that Whitney and Madonna embedded in their version. A touring exhibition called The Bridge Between Them features artifacts from the recording session, including the original tape, the letters, and interviews with people who knew both artists. The exhibition explores not just this one recording, but the broader story of how women in the music industry have supported each other despite media narratives of competition and rivalry. Most significantly, the duet inspired the creation of the Houston Foundation for Women in Music, named after Whitney's birth name and Madonna's real surname. The foundation provides mentorship, funding, and support for female artists, with a specific focus on creating collaborative rather than competitive environments. Whitney and Madonna showed us that there's enough room for everyone to be extraordinary, said the foundation's director, Lisa Martinez. Their friendship was an act of resistance against an industry that benefits from keeping women apart. We're making sure that act of resistance continues. In 2019, a documentary titled The Bridge They Built compiled interviews, footage, and analysis of Whitney and Madonna's relationship and their secret recording. The film included never-before-seen footage from the 1991 recording session that Quincy Jones had kept private. In the footage, viewers could see the genuine warmth between the two artists, the way they laughed together, supported each other's vocal choices, and created something beautiful through collaboration. The final scene of the documentary was particularly powerful. It showed Madonna listening to the duet alone in a studio, tears streaming down her face as Whitney's voice filled the room. When the song ended, Madonna looked directly at the camera and spoke. "People always want to know if we were really friends. They want to know if the rivalry was real. Here's the truth. Whitney Houston was one of the most important people in my life. She taught me that you don't have to choose between being strong and being vulnerable. She showed me that real power comes from being authentically yourself, even when the world wants you to be something else. And she gave me the gift of friendship at a time when both of us desperately needed to know we weren't alone." The recording we made together wasn't just a song. It was a promise. We promised each other that no matter what the world said about us, no matter how they tried to turn us into symbols or stereotypes, we would remember who we really were. We would be bridges for each other over troubled water. Whitney kept that promise for 21 years, and I'll keep it for the rest of my life. The impact of that recording continues to ripple outward. Music students study it as an example of perfect vocal harmony. Therapists use it to facilitate discussions about female friendship and support. Social activists reference it when talking about media manipulation and the importance of solidarity. And millions of people simply listen to it when they need to be reminded that connection is always possible, even in a world that profits from division. Whitney Houston and Madonna proved that two of the most powerful women in music could create something beautiful together, not despite their differences, but because of them. They showed that strength comes in many forms, that vulnerability and power are not opposites, and that the bridges we build between us are often the most important structures we'll ever create. Their secret duet was more than just a lost recording. It was evidence that even in an industry built on competition, even in a world obsessed with creating winners and losers, friendship is always possible. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to be truly honest with each other, we can create something so beautiful that it echoes across decades, touching hearts and changing lives long after the final note has faded.